It's a really nice day, living in the right space. Breathing your grace, got me feeling some kind of way.
Hi, everybody. This is Dr. Kim from Good News Mental Health, and I have my colleague and a friend, Miss Brissa. So thank you so much for being here.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
I just wanted this episode to be more of personal and vulnerable episode because we just got off a meeting and just talking to a lot of people who are in the thick of it, like marital stress, like, at the brink of divorce, fighting with spouses every day, raising your kids and maybe getting re-traumatized, realizing, oh my gosh, like I did not get the parenting that I needed when I was younger, or launching a business like myself and like you and trying to continue it and make it sustainable. And at the same time, never feeling good enough. Am I messing up? Like, where do I start? This is the life. This is a normal life of
Mhm.
living in our society today. And we wanted to kind of emphasize on if you were having any shame of who you were before. And a lot of things that reminds you of who you were, the mistakes, the faults, the falling short. How do we handle that?
Right. Yeah. It's a very loaded question, I think, and not breaking it apart, we'd be doing such a disservice to this. But I can think of many scenarios in my personal life where there's shame that comes in a lot in those moments. I've had a ton of regrets. I'm only human. I know people say live your life and just don't regret anything. And yeah, I think that we've all had life learning lessons and we learn from the things and mistakes that we've made. But for me personally, there were so many moments that I said, I should have done this. I could have done that. And as a perfectionist and high achiever, there will always be gaps and opportunities and blind spots, even where I look back and say, I should have done this. And there's that spiral or circle of worry of how I could have handled different situations. Um, we can start and I'll let you kind of also, we can kind of tell our own stories of where do we start with that. But
Yeah.
yeah, there's just so many moments.
I think you mentioned something that is key here. Shame is very different. Shame and guilt is very different from mistakes and regrets. I think there's a lot of different schools of thoughts in this, right? They say, oh, don't feel shame, don't feel guilty, don't feel any regret, just live your life, move forward. But I think I'm against that. I think you can still regret and call it mistake a mistake without bringing in shame and bringing in guilt. And I think the difference between the two is that mistake and regret are based on actions that you did. But I think shame and guilt identifies and values you based on your actions.
Mhm.
What do you think about that?
I think that so many of us combine shame, guilt with mistakes. I think we use them interchangeably, not in the way that you just mentioned. So maybe it's time to detach and break that apart because it's been part of my identity for so long up until recently to just, I haven't been able to let go of that. Right.
Mm,
And so learning, oh, that's shame is not me. I am not shame.
mm,
Sure, I made these mistakes, but I think I've just combined everything to
yeah.
where it's hard to look back and it's hard to go to, not that I go back to my hometown and visit my high school regularly a lot, but
Yeah.
I think in those moments where people have so many, or like people have high school reunions and they're like, I'm so excited to go back and see everyone.
Yeah.
And for me, I'm like, ew, no. And I'm saying ew, me.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
people think that I'm saying that about them, but I'm like, I just don't have a lot of great or fond memories. And in my head, I'm like, what if I did? And I've just blocked them all out because I've said, man, that whole 4 years of high school were horrible. And of course, our frontal lobes were not formed at that age. So of course we're going to probably see the worst in us. And I think for me, my expectation is like, I should have had this beautiful, like memorable 4 years, but instead I made all these mistakes and I wasn't perfect in X, Y, and Z or whatever it was.
Yeah, and I think going back to that is the shame and guilt like attacks us. So a lot of times in our heads, the statements could be not that I made a mistake, is I am a mistake, or I did something wrong versus I am wrong,
Mhm.
or I did something not appropriate. It's like I am inappropriate, So there's a difference of kind of how you say it to yourself inside your head so that, we can separate. So when you kind of feel like, and then what I feel like is, oh my gosh, I made a mistake versus I'm a mistake. I always make mistakes. I'm a mistake all the time. Like when I feel that, we can kind of protect ourselves. Part of the RPC method and the be still to move forward course is, okay, let me just protect my worth and my
Mhm.
intention and effort in this. Even though I made a mistake, let me just protect that.
Yeah.
So, but you mentioned I expected the 4 years of high school to be this breezy, cover girl, Maybelline cover girl kind of experience, right? And
Mhm.
I actually think that, so we separated the guilt and shame versus mistake and regrets, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
But the reason why we call one behavior a mistake and one behavior a solution is that there's an expectation of what it should produce. Just like your expectation that high school should be, 4 years of Maybelline, I don't know, breezy, easy breezy summer girl or whatever, Maybelline.
It's that,
What
like,
am I saying?
graduation song that comes into my brain, the, like, "Da da da da," right? I
Like,
think,
yeah,
like,
yeah,
that, like,
yeah.
oh, that's the perfect, like, everyone remembers their formative years or whatever, and I'm like, "I didn't have that."
Yeah. Oh, I'll tell you a funny story of like my expectations. I expected myself to be valedictorian and like not like
Mm,
only that.
not sure.
Freshman year, first semester in biology, I got 89.4.
Mm,
I begged my, AP biology teacher, please just like point one, zero, like four, just like please, like
mhm,
you're taking my dream away, you're taking my expectations away,
mhm.
and she was so kind and fair. She's like, Eugene, if I do this to you, then I have to do this to everyone. Like, where does that cutoff go, right? And then she didn't do it for me. And I was, like looking back, I sound so like first world problem, like whiny complainer, but I ended up being salutatorian. That was an expectation that it wasn't met.
Mhm,
So
mhm.
going back is I feel like we feel more shameful, more guilty. We feel like we make more mistakes because we have this very, very, very high and rigid expectations of ourselves.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I think how dare you get an 89? I remember being like an all A student and then getting those B's at the very end. I don't know if it was like I finally got a boyfriend, so I'm distracted in high school, and then thinking I should never have had a boy, and I probably should not have. But there is one that I don't regret saying.
Yeah.
But it is very hard. And then going into like university right after that and having these expectations of like, now you live by yourself, you're far away from your family, live up to the expectations or disappoint your family forever.
Mm,
I don't even know where that came from because my parents didn't really instill the like, you're not coming back home if you don't get all A's or anything like that. But I was very hard on myself and had to do it all and spread myself very thin. And I think that's just like an overachieving mindset too. And earlier you were mentioning how we also take it upon ourselves to say, I am the mistake. I whatnot. Years. I said that about a location, which was my hometown, West Texas, El Paso, which you and I share a
mhm,
little bit of that. If anyone's listening and you don't know where El Paso is, it is so far into the desert and it's the westest city in Texas. And right now we're in central Texas. So we're about 8 or 9 hours away driving over there. And you're not even halfway through the state.
mm-mm.
But
Yeah.
so it's far. We didn't do day trips really unless it was to New Mexico, and that is leaving the state. But we were a border city as well. So there's another cultural aspect tied to it. And I think for me, the focus was just school, and that's all you do there in that kind of small town, small city feel. I labeled El Paso as like the worst place to go back to because I had made these mistakes. So it's almost like not only was I saying like I was the mistake or I blah, 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 I was labeling El Paso as like this evil city that did not provide
Mm,
growth for me, which is such a lie.
Yeah.
And so for me, it became a shameful place. And I just wanted to run away from it because there were moments where I was not proud of who I was or what I did. And this was all while I was being this perfect Christian as well. And so
Mhm.
I was putting shame on myself. Nobody else was. So yeah, I thought that was funny that you could also label a location and feel so fearful of going back to it or whatever it is in your mind. It doesn't have to just be you. It could be something else that you're kind of also putting that blind shame to.
Yeah, and that reminds me of, so in the sheet in the workbook there's a defense mechanism chart, right? And
Mhm,
that's projection, is that you're projecting how you feel to a person, to a place, to a thing, right?
mhm,
And I think a lot of times, not to even go back to like where does high expectation come from, because we can definitely talk about that, is like the danger, I think, and the risk of not identifying what you and I are kind of reflecting on in our own lives is that we tend to project an unfair description or value onto things like El Paso. Like we were talking about your journey in El Paso, but we tend to label a whole city like that. I did that for Houston. I avoided Houston because I
mhm,
just didn't like what happened there,
mhm,
And I think here's a catch. I think we project a lot of our anxiety and shame and fear onto our kids when we see our kids doing the similar things or telling a small little white lie. We're gonna projecting our fear on, oh my gosh, they're gonna be a liar, or like,
mhm, yeah,
that worst case scenario on our kids, right? So I think when you're able to be still and recognize, oh, this is a projection, this is not reality, I think it saves us a lot of future regrets,
mhm.
because we're just being mindful of like how we're interpreting things.
Yeah, absolutely. I think when I took this course, I realized I had a lot of that trauma with my inner child and I hadn't resolved a lot of things or self-analyzed. I consider myself to be a pretty high self-aware individual. It doesn't mean that by being self-aware that I'm going to work on the things that I know need to be worked on. Like I can always push those aside and not prioritize them. So I noticed that I was doing a lot of like blaming, whether that's on me or others or places, people. And I was stuck in labeling things that were negative as like things I shouldn't go back to or whatever. It could be something as simple as like, again, we'll go back to the boyfriend thing. I wanted a boyfriend in high school. So when
Mhm.
I had a boyfriend, I was making all these other mistakes, right? And so I was like going out to a party for the first time and I was always uncomfortable in that scene. That wasn't the type of personality I have. I was very introverted and a homebody and not a partier. So I was kind of getting into like the wrong circles. Never tried drugs at that point in my life, and I wasn't really drinking. But I was around it enough to where I was like, oh my gosh, this is too crazy for me.
Mhm.
At that age, still 17, 18. And I prioritized a lot of that. And that's the shame I feel in that I would be like, all of a sudden my boyfriend, your first lustful, you think it's like love, like, oh my gosh, I put them first and everything. And I missed out on a lot of great moments like prom and like all these other things. And because I decided to say yes to this person of like, let's go to a party instead, or let's do this. And for me making those decisions, I always said, why did you do that? And I remember thinking, oh, like I'm yelling at my little Brissa,
Uh-huh.
I didn't realize that I was like shaming her all of the time for like, why did you do this? Why did you do this? Because I didn't hear that question loud enough. It was just the feeling of like, oh, I don't want to go back to El Paso. But I never went back further than like, oh, it's because a lot of bad things happened there. That's it. I would always leave it at that. I wouldn't do any more exploration beyond it because I knew how uncomfortable. And it wasn't until I was saying, like, I looked at my son, my daughter, and sure, we asked, like, why did you feel like you have to do that? But I say it in such a kind tone.
Mm.
And I'm not saying that to my inner child. I'm being
Yeah.
very mean, you made all these mistakes and like do this. And no, I'm going to shelter you and you're not going to go back to El Paso or those whatever. And I'm not going to let you do that. And that's not a place for growth for like my
Yeah.
inner child. She's in a bubble stuck.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think when we are reflecting on how do we get here, like how why are we so harsh to our inner child? You know, like why do we set them to such high expectation and standards that we know that logically is impossible, but like why do we even keep on doing that? As of our marriage has to be perfect, our kids has to be perfect, our career has to be perfect, it has to make sense. For me, like big thing that I'm struggling right now is like everything has to make progressive sense. You know, like I have to have a direction. If not, then like all is failed, right? So I think you mentioned that, you know, my parents were never like, you know, don't come home if you don't get all A's, like college thing. And when we talk about sending a message to our kid, we can either set them for negative reinforcement or positive reinforcement. So you and I naturally have like perfectionistic people pleasing tendencies, right? Like that's just us. But it could have been reinforced by praising when you do good things, praising when you get an A, praising when you help out around the house. And then you're like, oh, if I do more of these things and do it all the time, then I'm going to have an assured source of security and, you know, satisfaction coming from this. Then it kind of becomes like a dopamine hit every time that you do good and you're like satisfied. So it doesn't necessarily have to be I messed up, I got a B plus and I got spanked. You know, it doesn't always have to be that. It can be like a positive reinforcement. Then you're like, I want more of this. And it really drives us to make our expectations higher and higher and higher.
Yeah, and I'm literally just writing a note down that you made me think of. One of the things I noticed after taking your course, and it wasn't immediate, this took a really long time, but there was almost shame in asking for praise too growing up.
Mm,
I don't know why. Maybe I didn't communicate that well, but like I did it. I asked for validation for my work so blatantly, so much in my adulthood. Like, like, did I do a good job on this in college? Did I do what did you think? And like, I loved having those words of praise or acknowledgments and affirmations, but I almost felt like drug addicted to them.
mm,
Like, I need more of this. And it carried over into my marriage. And it was like, of course, when you're in the lovey-dovey honeymoon stage before you're married, you are entirely different than when you're married. And then you're entirely different than when you become parents. So then when I was emptying my cup for my kids all the time and just pouring myself into the family, I was like, man, my husband does not acknowledge what I'm doing. Like, what a great
mm,
job I'm doing being a mom. Or
mm,
he is not doing or saying this. And I put so much pressure. That I started like trying to call him out for it. Why don't you like I feel like I'm
mm,
doing everything for you. But he also was, right? Like it's
mhm,
just like I just he would tell me, I just don't need that from you. Like I don't it doesn't come to mind because I don't need it. There were so many other ways that he was showing me, the love for our family, like cooking, making coffee, cleaning, whatever. But I was like, who cares about that? I need to know,
yeah,
like all this stuff.
yeah.
Well, it took weeks after I took the course when finally I noticed I didn't need him in that way anymore. And it was such a big shift that I'm so proud of. And I've never gone there, but I'm so much more self secure now. I don't need him to say, I'm beautiful or I need like you're whatever. I feel like I've been saying that to myself now. Like I'm
Yeah.
such a hard worker and like little Brisa, you did so good to
Mm,
put me where I am today, your dreams, aspirations, like speaking to that child I never had before in a kind manner, giving her that like invisible hug and all of that stuff.
aw,
Never did that. And so I feel much more confident and secure and able to set more boundaries, not needing other people for that like external validation 24/7.
yeah.
But that was something major that I saw, just like the confidence that I was able to get in myself and not needing it from others.
Yeah, exactly. I have like a similar history. Like, I needed my husband to protect me verbally and maybe aggressively whenever there was like an in law drama, you know? And I was like, why can't you be the provider and protector? You're not protecting me and you're not standing up for me. Granted, like, I had like a pretty blunt, direct mouth that would like get me in more problems, you know? My husband is like a peacemaker. So he's like, what is happening? Like, it's like,
Yeah.
I have a Rottweiler of a wife. Like,
You're expecting me to act that
I
way?
can't protect you when you're like going to fire. Yeah. So that's probably like one aspect of that. But the need for security that I wanted was whenever there was like a drama growing up, my parents didn't protect me, right? So then either my mom is in bad mood and then dad didn't protect me, or dad's in, weird mood and mom didn't protect me, vice versa, right? So then there's somebody else external sense of security and just like giving me benefit of the doubt became like a drug that I needed, or a thick wall that I needed to be up the whole time. And I wanted Nathan to be exactly that, but the more that I was praying about it and he's not really stepping up to the plate, like protecting me the way that I expected him to be. But at the end of the day, when we were struggling with it, and this was like one of our bigger marriage issues, I think Brissa, you and I can go on like a thick segment on this. I thought I couldn't protect myself because that was not what godly women do.
Mm-hmm.
Like wife had to be protected and wife cannot protect herself, let's say, right? Like gender roles, right? So then we fought about this a lot, where I thought he had to be masculine, I had to be feminine in the back, being protected like a princess. And at the end of the day, it was really when God was talking to me, he's like, you can step up for yourself too. And you don't have to be
Mm-hmm.
ugly and nasty about it, but you can say, hey, I don't like that, or I'm gonna walk away. Like you have to say that for yourself too. And that was such a life changing for me. Kind of like what you're saying is that, nowadays my husband steps up, but now I'm like, I can also stand up for myself,
Mm-hmm.
and that was such a freedom for me.
My gosh. Yes, this is an entirely different other tangent podcast episode, but like, and I wrote it down too. But I remember early in our marriage, I told my husband I was frustrated and I was like, you're not leading me the way that God
Uh,
has asked us to. And it pisses me off that I said that. Like, that's another where I'm like,
I
you're
know, me too.
not. Yeah.
I said the same thing too.
And I feel so bad when other women are like, he's not leading me. They're supposed to be the ones leading me.
Mm,
And I'm like, no, girl, like you will be so much happier if you lead yourself, you let God lead you, and you're not putting that really big, horrible expectation on
mm,
others, especially your spouse. And so it's like they were set up for failure in a way,
uh,
right? Because no one's going to ever be able to meet that. God's going to be able to meet that, but nobody here on
yeah.
earth will. And so I think that my husband panicked when I would bring that up to him, and he'd be like, I don't want to lead you the wrong way. And he was
Mhm,
absolutely right. That didn't register before, but he was like, there's so much pressure. He was a PK, a pastor's kid, and
mhm,
there's so much pressure on him and to be this like perfect role model in the family who kind of like owned the church in the town. And so me or him hearing that from me would freak him out because
yeah.
he's like, whoa, I didn't ask to be placed on this pedestal. And like, how am I, like, you lead yourself, like, you read your
And for
devotionals.
him, it's like, I didn't ask for this to happen again.
Yeah,
You know what I mean?
that's such a great perspective. Like, I didn't ask to be put in this like pressure like cooker all over again that you're
Yeah.
putting me in. And like I was like years later, wow, he didn't feel like relieved to be with me in those moments when I was putting this like pastoral whatever reason for him. So when other women say and get frustrated, they're not leading me the right way, they're not doing this. I'm like, well, are you doing it for yourself? Is the
Yeah.
question that comes to mind. And now I'm proactive about it, right? Like, luckily, I've had good relationships with my in-laws, my set of in-laws. So there's never been an issue. But like, if we were to bring something up, I go respectfully. As much as I love them, they're your parents. So before we go over there, can you mention X, Y, and Z? And I give him that set standard, the very basic, like, don't get mad, don't whatever. Just, can you mention that we're not able to go to this event? It could be something as simple as that, but
Yeah,
because
yeah,
I
yeah.
was always in that position, I frustrated and tired myself out being the over communicator to all parties, my family and
Yeah,
his.
yeah,
So
yeah,
now
yeah.
I'm like, you know what? Let's divvy up responsibilities here. Just want to remind you, your mom's birthday is coming up.
Huh?
get her a birthday gift that's special from you and us because I've
Yeah.
been doing this for 10 years. Whatever, but now I'm communicating and
Yeah.
not being proactive and not being mad about it when he doesn't do it and I'm left to do it because I'm an overachiever, right? And so it comes from that like uh, planning ahead without feeling burnout or overwhelmed.
Yeah. And setting realistic expectations of ourselves, right?
Mhm.
And I think kind of going back to like we're touching a little bit of everything, and I hope that the listeners kind of understand that this can go far and wide. Like once you understand yourself, and once you understand how to accept yourself and how to give yourself grace and how to debunk a lot of myths that we've been living by, it goes beyond us. Like goes to our marriages, our kids, our career. And I wanted to kind of go back to how rechecking our expectations of ourselves helps our expectation of our husband, just like you and I kind of talked about, right? And something kind of somebody said to me like jokingly that there's not a single husband who thinks his wife is crazy, and there's not a single wife who thinks her husband is dumb. Right. And like you and I've been on that wagon where we're like, oh my gosh, he's always checked out. You know, he never does things. You know, he's always like, you know, fight or flight or freeze, but he's always freeze. You know, he's never paying attention. Like we said those things, we
Yeah,
felt those things, and I think everybody can resonate with that.
right.
But now that we're on the other side and we're like, oh my gosh, not only am I having harsh, like unrealistic expectations of myself, now I'm putting harsh, unrealistic expectation of my husband. And
Mhm.
not to mention, and you and I talked about this in previous episodes, our husbands have inner child issues that they need to work through and they want to work through and they need space and time to work through, right?
Mhm.
So it's like I feel like when we're not only self aware, but actually comforted and buffered to step towards understanding and healing and cheering our inner child on, you know,
Mhm.
to move forward, I think it really helps our husband. And I think it really helps our kids because now everybody has realistic expectations. And now, not only are you like, oh my gosh, I have to take care of everybody's birthday presents and go to all these events and make sure that
Mhm.
everybody's understood. Now you can divvy up because you have a capacity, your husband's have capacity, your kids have capacity, you know, so everybody's kind of carrying their own load in a realistic and sustainable way.
Yeah, no, exactly. Sustainable, I think, is a really great word for it because um our form of reality, it's like we were just setting everyone up for failure with I mean, if I'm doing it for myself, writing 13 items on my to-do list for one day, which is so unrealistic, why am I
Yeah.
doing that for him?
Yeah.
It could be anything. Early on, I was like, let's bond through books because I love reading. And,
Yeah.
I'm like, let's do a little like husband and wife book club. And then let me buy you a planner, which was never used. And let me like, and
The
then,
journals, I bought him.
yes. And,
You need to reflect on your feelings right now.
I was just like, what was I doing? So like a decade ago. And now it's like he listens to audiobooks all the time that are very insightful and intellectual things that actually serve our family. But like it wasn't in the form of a book. And I had these like weirdly stagnant expectations. And so I'm like, look, he's growing in his own developmental areas that are like entirely different than mine. Why
Mhm.
should I expect him to do things my way?
Mhm.
And that was just a part of control for me. Like, can I control this vision that I have for my life, this perfect little bubble?
Yeah.
Because I don't want to make mistakes again, which is so
Yeah.
dumb. But yeah.
Yeah, there was a moment I wanted our marriage to be so healthy, you know, like communication on point, you know, like so then I'm like forcing him to read all these marriage books, which like scared the crap out of him and like made him stress
Mhm,
out more, right? And there is, you mentioned control and we mentioned letting go, right?
mhm,
And we mentioned expectations and what's our job and what's not. I
mhm,
had to come to a point where I'm trying to make this marriage happen like in a perfect
mhm,
way, but I can't do that. And in fact, in a pursuit of that, I'm like hurting our marriage more. So I had to come to terms with I'm only responsible for 50% of this. And if it
mhm.
doesn't work, I'm only responsible for 50%.
Yeah.
And that letting go of control of potential outcome that's just like a carrot on a stick kind of
Mm-hmm.
That was kind of scary for me
Yeah.
because I didn't know if he will hold up, like, or if I don't do 100%, we say quote unquote, because we're not really doing 100%. We think we're
Right.
doing 100%, we're not. And it's like, if I let go of that facade of myself doing everything I can and I'm only responsible for 50, and what if it doesn't turn out well? Like,
Mhm.
how would I view myself then? So there's that balance. Whenever we let go, we accept and we move forward, but at the same time protect our intention and effort. All of this kind of beautiful, dough of wisdom, it really comes to play at different points in time. So I guess, like, it was really scary for me to let go of my marriage and
Mhm.
say, okay, I'm only gonna do my part. And if it fails, then I don't know what that means, but I'm only responsible for 50. That was a
Yeah.
scary letting go of that.
Yeah. Yeah. Even thinking about it.
Yeah.
But I think I've also realized I've done it because I couldn't anymore. I've also done that, but it was like out of my control.
Mhm.
It was like, my husband or my kids, they're going to do things their way. And I'm like, okay, there's only so much I can control during my day, my time. So it was just released from me
Yeah.
almost.
That's a good point because I had to let go. It was scary to let go, but I couldn't hold on anymore the way that I was holding on. It was so tight. It was so rigid. It was not sustainable for me. So either, I was going to end or the marriage and parenting was going to end, And I just hope that everybody who's listening too, like, if you're like, I can't hold on or sustain this expectation, right? Like, this speed, this busyness anymore. I think you're onto something. I think the world, God, people around you are trying to tell you this is not sustainable for you.
Mhm, mhm. I feel like that's the title or theme that we need to go with. I like that kind of end line. It's just not, and if you don't decide for yourself, it's gonna be decided for you. Might as well be proactive and try to do it yourself, to let go, to delegate out, to understand that things are not gonna go your way all of the
Yeah.
time. Things will get done, but, yeah.
I love that. I just love this episode because we touch on a lot of things. But I think what I wanted everybody to kind of know is that it feels like wildfire in your life right now. And like maybe your marriage is on fire, your parenting, your fire, your childhood trauma is coming back to haunt you. Your career's on fire, and nothing is out of fire. But I think if I were to kind of wrap it up, is that self awareness, healing your inner child is going to be like a fire extinguisher within.
Mhm,
The sustainability comes from within when you don't think that you need to do everything, fix everything, control everything, be productive. When those expectations start to kind of go down, and like Brissa, you mentioned, talking to your inner child like a child, and saying, hey, it's okay, or good job for this, or hey, you can stand up for yourself in here and there. And when we kind of talk to ourselves, I think it really does bring sustainability in our lives.
yeah, 100%. And I know we're going to continue to expand on like all the small things that we talked about too, but I agree.
Yeah. Well, thank you, everybody. I hope that you found some hope and direction in this episode. Brissa and I'll be checking in here and there, just sharing our lives with you because I know that we've been there and we'll probably be there in different phases of our lives too. So, this Good News Mental Health podcast is just to bring you that there's always good news, even when we're in the thick of it. So, thank you so much for listening. Hey guys, if you like content like this, then check out my free webinar called How to Be More Present, Peaceful, and Poised without losing your schedule, savings, or sanity. Scan the QR code or check out my bio to get the link.